Welcome, welcome, everybody. Greg Peterson coming to you from the Urban Farm Podcast in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm here with Jesse. Hello, Jesse.
Hello, Greg.
And I'm here with David. Hello, David.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about Introduction to Permaculture. We do these monthly. The second Monday of each month, we will do one of these ongoingly. And the intent is to get people excited at the beginning level about what permaculture is. And I am doing this in conjunction with Permaculture Institute of North America. So Jesse, go ahead and jump in. Why don't you tell us what PINA, that's the short version of the name PINA. Tell us what PINA is.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. And it's so exciting to be doing these together. It's just a great combination of Greg's work and our work because Greg has a million podcasts, which he'll tell you about in a second. But so he's perfect for this role. And we at PINA are all about fostering permaculture knowledge and also livelihoods from, hey, I just learned about permaculture till I want to make a career into that. I want to really make change on a broad scale. So we are the professional development organization, and we're looking to build credentialing systems. We have a diploma program. We really just want to help people get from point A to point B on their permaculture journey and finding right livelihood in conjunction with the permaculture ethics, which David will talk more about the ethics and what is the permaculture thing. A couple things that I just want to say. First, I just want to say hi. I was also new to permaculture way back in 2000 maybe, and I was looking around and going like, man, the world's kind of messed up, especially like ecologically, like pollution and cutting down beautiful landscapes and harming bees and all that sort of stuff. And eventually, somehow or another, I stumbled upon permaculture. Bill Mollison was a real big influence on me. I got into his writings a lot, which the pamphlets, by the way, are available, and you can read some of his early pamphlet writing. I'll give you a link to that in a second. But fast forward, I took a permaculture design certificate course, or a PDC, in 2006. That was my first course, and that was life-changing. Absolutely changed my whole, like, my branch of my life's path was traveling one way, and then from that moment, it traveled a different way to the betterment, I would say. And I've since taken other courses. I highly suggest taking multiple PDCs if you're really into permaculture, because you're hearing from different teachers, just like we're going to hear from David about an introduction to permaculture. You can learn a lot just from hearing different introduction to permacultures. And that's what Greg and I are hoping to do with this series. But that's where I come from. And now to this day, I'm working with PINA. I'm the program services manager. So I help with things like the diploma program and setting up events like this and summits and these types of things. But I won't bore you with all the things that PINA is into, but I will just say, consider if you support permaculture, if you're interested in supporting the growth of permaculture from an institutional perspective, many voices getting together and all pushing toward the same thing, then please consider becoming a PINA member today. I'll put the link in the chat. It's only $20 a year. So we try to make it as easy as possible to get in, and there's definite benefits and you get freebies and all that sort of stuff if you join. So I'll put that in the chat. And just keep us in mind as you move in your permaculture journey. PINA's out there trying to help y'all, maybe if not now, at some other point in the future. And the other thing that I want to invite you to, that PINA co-hosts also with a partner organization called ARC, the Association for Regenerative Culture. We host a social media site that's permaculture only, run by permaculturists and regenerative sort of designers. And that's called the PCX, or a Permaculture Crossing. It's on the Mighty Network platform, if you've ever heard of that. It operates very much like Facebook, except without all the perverse capitalist incentives that are involved in the Facebook world, aka you can see everybody's post, right? They're not like, you don't have to pay to see things and that sort of thing. So consider jumping on there. Free to join. You can poke around. There's a bunch of resources. The pamphlets that I was telling you about that Bill Mollison wrote that really inspired me and probably many other permaculturists are there in the resources section totally for free. So check those out. And yeah, just so happy to be here. And Greg, looking forward to this presentation with David and the next ones that we do. Thank you again for being our co-host, and take it away, Greg.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you. That was excellent. Make sure you put those links in the chat that you mentioned.
Yes.
If you are attending this event live, you can go down to the right and drop your questions for us in the Q&A. You can also chat in the chat box with the three of us if you want to go there. But yeah, so drop your questions in. And also, yeah, there we go. Perfect. You mentioned, Jesse, the Urban Farm Podcast, millions of episodes. I don't have millions of episodes, but we do have over 900 episodes, including David Holmgren. David got 3. When I got him on the phone, for those of you who don't know, David Holmgren is the co-founder of Permaculture. When I got him on the phone and started chatting, I just let him talk. he must have talked for about an hour and a half, and I made that into 3 episodes. That was epic. But what I do have on the podcast is millions of listens. We've had over 5 million listens. And the thank you, and the Urban Farm podcast is 10 years old next month. So I've been doing it 10 months, 10 years, and
never missed an episode, I think, if I got that right.
and never missed a space. Exactly.
So speaks to your character and your commitment, Greg. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet. At least one a week for the last 10 years. There you go. All right, today we are here to talk about introduction to permaculture. And we have David Jannotta. He is a permaculture designer and agroforester based in Asheville, North Carolina. During his permaculture design course in 2019 at the Greening the Desert project in Jordan, he witnessed firsthand the power of permaculture to help regenerate some of the most degraded soils on Earth. Since then, he has dedicated his life to studying and practicing regenerative design. In 2025, he earned a master's in agroforestry and food security from Bangor University, where he specialized in successional agroforestry in temperate climates. Currently, David works for Contour Lines, helping to design and install agroforestry systems on contour throughout the eastern United States. Welcome, David. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Good to be here with you guys and share about just the basics of permaculture and yeah, resonate with what Jesse was saying about it being a very distinct pivot in my life, discovering permaculture and just really excited to be involved with PINA and having met you guys pretty recently and looking forward to being involved more and sharing this and helping people that are wherever you are in your permaculture journey, get from A to B or wherever that is, and hopefully this can be a part of it.
A
I'm
stepping
gonna,
stone. Hold on before you share your screen. Agroforestry came up several times in your bio. Before we go into your presentation, can you give us 2 minutes on what is agroforestry?
yeah, and we'll hear about it in the presentation too, but it's a term, big umbrella term for integrating trees into farmland. And you can do it many different ways, and just there's so many benefits of trees onto farmland that doesn't have enough perennials and shrubs on it. And we just need to integrate more perennials into annual agriculture and get more biodiversity in there. And so
Awesome.
there's a little spiel in it later about it.
All
Yeah,
right,
because it is
cool.
a big overlap with permaculture. A lot of it has a cozy home under the umbrella of permaculture for sure.
Oh, I love that. A cozy home.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, let's jump in, sir.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to
Yep,
start
we're good.
with great. Okay. So I'm going to start with just a quick definition and then get into some of the principles of permaculture and then end with some on the ground examples and some of the work I'm involved in. So that'll be the rough structure of this. And so the first definition is from Bill Mollison, and we can read it here: conscious design and maintenance of agriculturally productive ecosystems with diversity, stability, and resilience of natural ecosystems. So they're human designed ecosystems which function like all the natural ecosystems we see around us. And then I put in this other one down below, which mentions human settlements and designing regenerative agricultural systems. And that really gets to the heart of it, where it is about the human element and how we can secure our needs from the landscape in terms of food, fuel, and fiber while regenerating it as well. And so it really is just the harmony of those regenerative agricultural systems with the human settlements. And these two fellas are the co-originators and founders, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. And it came about in the 70s alongside these different concepts that were taking off, like systems thinking and holistic design, sustainable design. All of these were kind of hot topics, and permaculture developed alongside of it. And what they were trying to do was integrate a lot of these different fields that David particularly saw as a little siloed and not talking to each other. So there was the organic ag movement in the 60s and 70s and the back to the land, and then but that wasn't really talking with what was going on with architecture. And so yeah, this gets at it integrates three of these major fields. And to give a picture of just how wide and broad of an umbrella permaculture is, each one of these three that make up it are huge umbrellas to begin with. So it gets at just how multidisciplinary permaculture is. And you'll find people that are more on the ecology side, more on the architecture side. So, yeah, many different branches of organic agriculture like biodynamics and agroforestry have found very cozy home underneath the umbrella of permaculture to the point where if you say one, you think of permaculture. Yeah, that's how rooted they are and related to permaculture that they are. And oh yeah, one more thing about permanent agriculture, that's the long phrase of it. That was not come up with by Bill Mollison or David Holmgren. There was another book called Tree Crops, A Permanent Agriculture, written in 1920. And so this idea was circulating around, and there's all these originators of the concept that were getting at permanent tree crops being a very viable agricultural system. And Bill Mollison took from them and was basically a very good compiler of information and combining of information that he sourced throughout the world. These are the 12 principles that David Holmgren has come up with since it was created. And yeah, they're a good jumping off point. They get at the philosophy of permaculture a lot. Just a good jumping off point to get a feel for what it's about. And some are more practical and others are more like philosophical. And I really like that. And yeah, I really like use edges and value the marginal because it's about using on turning the problem into the solution and using resources that you don't normally see as a resource and using what you have. And also edges within ecosystems, when one ecosystem turns into the other, the edge between those two is often the most biodiverse. And that's often the type of ecosystem we're trying to create. So it's a dual meaning there. And it's based on three major ethics: caring for the earth, caring for people, and returning the surplus, which here is set as fair share for rhyming factor. And earth care and people care are pretty straightforward, and it's all overlapping because we can't just care for the earth and have huge conservation zones and not care for people and feed people. And fair share and returning of the surplus gets at whatever resources come out of a system, we need to return it to the land in a material way in terms of returning your kitchen scraps to the garden. And so it's a very straightforward material thing, but it's also about whatever wealth and any sort of resource that comes from any yield to distribute it equitably. So yeah, with those three in mind as a foundation, that's where it's what it's built off from. And Bill wrote a very robust overview of the principles within the Permaculture Designer's Manual. And he is seen as more of the founder of the permaculture movement who brought it to the world. He coalesced the ideas in this manual and then brought it to the rest of the world, whereas David stayed back in Australia and began to practice the principles on a piece of land. But Bill really spearheaded creating the grassroots movement, which is based on people taking a PDC or permaculture design course, or I see here certificates, It's called both sometimes. And it's grassroots in the sense of it's a 72-hour course that began with Bill, that if you take the course, you get certified in permaculture, and then that gives you the ability to teach a PDC to anyone else. And it's a pretty radical thing to have it not be a centralized institution and diploma program. And that was very intentional in Bill's mind to have it be organically spreading in that way. And it's just based on trust, where if you get a PDC, you will then teach people when you feel you're ready. And it just has spread across the globe organically and grassroots in that way since that began. It is also, this textbook is also the foundational text for the PDC, where each chapter relates to one of the topics within the PDC. And the first three chapters are, if you want to expand and go to the next stepping stone after this intro, highly recommend the first three chapters of that book. And then also just in there, the chapter on deserts or drylands is pretty amazing. So here are some of the principles of holistic design in general, and what is said in that manual is when you're designing things that have different components, you want to focus on the interactions between the components rather than the components themselves. So that could look like, in this example, in this little farmscape, you have a little chicken area and you have a garden, and let's say you have a little greenhouse and a rainwater catchment and all these fancy techniques, sustainable techniques, but if they're not integrated and relating to each other, where the waste of one is the resource for the other, it will fall apart. It won't be harmonious. So it's really about the beneficial interactions, maximizing those instead of getting kind of tunnel vision on often trendy techniques. It's really about the holistic design of the system and how it functions as a whole, and just working with nature rather than against it. That's a big one. And really from the ground up, working with what resources you have. And so here, this diagram is about the zones. And so you have your house here, and the zones get at the amount of interactions the person will have with that area. So the garden you want close to your home because you're looking at it, you're tending it, it's highly managed. And as you go out into the concentric rings, essentially, of the zones, you have a system that's, you have your cows out on your pasture that you don't need to see every day. You need to see them once a week. And then it gets progressively less managed until zone 5, where that's the wilderness. And that's the eternal classroom of observation, where you're always looking for inspiration and seeing what nature is doing to bring back to the systems you manage. So that's a pretty, yeah, central way you just go about designing a landscape that you want to live on and grow food on, is the zones. And then also one of the primary things that you focus on first is shaping the land to passively harvest water. And so the main question that you start with is, how can you intercept all of the various forces of nature rolling through your property, intercept them, and turn them into a productive yield of some sort, instead of it being a just running off your land? And water being the queen of those resources, along with wind and sunlight, and you want to shape the land to harvest water, because if you don't, water can be a very destructive and erosive and chaotic force, and it doesn't allow for productive systems. And so here, shaping the land in a physical way to intercept the rainwater and soak it into the landscape, and then you plant trees on the landscape that you've shaped, and it converts the water that soaks into the ground into plant life. And so that's that transformation of the energy of water into plant life. Instead of being erosive and running and eroding the soil on your landscape, you're turning it into the water is now growing trees instead of carrying off your precious topsoil. And so the stages of digging these trenches on contour to infiltrate the water, planting the perennials, and here we have a little animal system down there. And there's so many benefits to passive water harvesting and shaping the land. You do better in droughts because the soil is more saturated and can passively irrigate crops, and you don't need tanks or irrigation. So it's very useful technique, very widespread technique in many different climates. And it's especially useful in drylands. It's almost critical in drylands if you're dealing with slopes, but you can also do it in temperate climate and the tropics. And so, yeah, physically shaping the land to hold water is just the bread and butter of permaculture, and some sort of shaping of the land or thinking about water is applicable to if you're doing permaculture in any climate. And here are some examples in two different climates. So here we have on the left is somewhere in the Sahel of Africa where they are digging these modular earthworks called half moons, where it's just a little trench that holds rainwater, but it's in this, and you do a ton of them. So when it rains, as you can see, these pools and ponds are filling up with the rainwater that would have kept on running down the slope, and it increases grass growth, and that's good for the pastoralists of these communities who have livestock that need fodder, or you can grow staple crops in these half moons that is very critical for food security in a lot of these desertifying regions of the world. And yeah, that's a clear example of the overlap between wise water management and food security. If you get the water management right, that will lead to a stable, more stable food production system and a more stable society. And on the right, very different climate of Austria, this well-known permaculturalist Sepp Holzer on a very steep slope has made cascading ponds that fill up and overflow into one another. And just seeing that, this being on the side of a mountain, how much water he's holding and what that would have looked like before. It's just a total transformation. And it's just really inspiring to see that we can have that sort of beneficial impact on the earth. It looks like you're tearing up the earth and digging holes and trenches and everything, but then and then once it settles, life just explodes, and where water comes, life comes. And this is also a good picture to talk about the order of operations when looking at a landscape and shaping it for water. So it's a really good example because you shape the land for water first because certain placements of these ponds, the land just begs for places to have the ponds based on slope. And so you get the pond locations first, and then you see where access can happen, where roads can be, where the pathways along the ponds can be. And then after those two basic design elements are put in, then you can assess the landscape for where structures should be, like where this house should be. And so that order of operations, water, access, structure, gets at what is the most primary thing, what is the highest priority, and the thing that matters the most. And water is often one of the most important, and that's why it's first. Yeah. So another quintessential permaculture thing is food forests, and this slide and food forests in general could be a whole talk unto itself, and especially about how they are perennial polycultures, as they're sometimes called, are not new, and they've just been repackaged within permaculture. And so these are multi-layered systems that have different plants interacting with each other and mimicking a forest. Because in a forest, everything is growing so close together, but they all have their niche. They all have different light requirements and different growth habits, and they're all packed in there. And it's a diversity of different species that creates that stability. And so, what a food forest is, it takes that same concept of a stable forested ecosystem and replacing different species with food producing species. So, what you have is a forest, an ecosystem that functions like a forest but has more food producing species than it would if it was natural. And you have species that are dedicated to supporting the other ones. And so those are called support species. So you have fruit trees and production species or berry bushes, whatever you want to yield out of or to eat. Then you have often hardy nitrogen fixing species that you plant alongside of those to support it. And one of the major management things that you do within a food forest is prune support species to feed the fruit trees that you want to get a good crop out of. Yeah, and just to highlight more, there's countless examples of perennial polycultures, essentially food forests around the world. They have cropped up in different climates and different civilizations across history. And you can find in almost every culture some sort of ancient perennial agriculture that involves trees. And one major example is the milpa agroforestry in Central America, which that is very like a food forest because they grow annuals alongside food producing perennials in a long cycle. And that's a practice that is thousands of years old and highly productive. And there's even speculation and some proof places that some forests that are seen as natural that have food producing species were traditionally managed by indigenous cultures to be essentially a food forest and just lightly managed. And a lot of the forests we see today that we see as natural are actually the legacy of ancient food forestry, which this is why this slide could be a whole topic in itself. Very fascinating, very like vast topic of the history of food forestry and how it is cropped up in different cultures. And so now we put it all together. We put the water harvesting, earth shaping alongside the food forest. And there you have a very harmonious system where you have multi-layered polyculture where all the plants are working together and you plant it on the mound of the trench that infiltrates the water and the water comes to feed the perennial system because the roots are right in the best place as the water infiltrates and you just have that stability of a forest. And here you even see examples of what the canopy trees are and what the understory trees are, and all of them are food producing. And the ones that have N next to it, false indigo and clover, that's nitrogen. So that those are nitrogen fixing support species. So this diagram shows what are the food producing production species and what are the nitrogen fixing support species. So you want both of those elements in there because if you just have production species or highly demanding food crops, those will it's just not sustainable. You need biological fertility in there, and that's what nitrogen fixers do because nitrogen is one of the major growth elements that helps grow plants. And so here's agroforestry, one of the Venn diagram of where agroforestry ends and permaculture begins is very blurry, but it's a little more broad in the sense of there's different techniques on how to integrate trees onto farmland that doesn't exactly look like the food forest polycultures that we were just talking about. And some of those techniques are integrating trees onto pasture, seen on the left, and then planting trees alongside rivers called riparian buffers. And that's really good for erosion mitigation and soaking up any pollution or soil that is running off of farmland, infiltrating it and soaking it up before it enters the waterways. So those are very crucial for erosion mitigation. And then we have alley cropping, which are rows of trees planted in a field of corn or wheat. And so you do annual cropping in between the rows of trees, and you can get two yields. You can get a yield of fruit or nuts or timber that could be harvested in 20 years, and all the while you're getting an annual crop of corn or wheat or whatnot. And also, within the middle of the field, those perennial roots and those trees help mitigate the whatever harm the annual agriculture is doing in terms of erosion or nutrient runoff. These roots are here to soak it up and help with water infiltration, and also just bring some biodiversity and perennial roots back into farmland, which can be just acres and acres of just annuals. And this picture is a very idyllic painting of what the Midwest and the beating heart of annual agriculture, industrial agriculture in America could look like. And I think it's a very inspiring picture for how perennials can be reintegrated onto farmland and produce very valuable crops in the meantime, like nuts, that can actually be a replacement carbohydrate for corn, let's say. And here is a picture of an installation of swales that are on contour. You can see the contour lines. It's literally just a drawing of a map, essentially. I think it's really beautiful looking. And this was done by Contour Lines Corp, this nonprofit that I work for, and they help install agroforestry around the US. And it's a grant program where a farmer can apply and they receive free trees and technical service to have the swales dug for them. And they have help planting. And in part of the agreement is they promise to do regenerative practices like mulching and cover cropping. And so a really important element of this is when you excavate these swales, there's bare soil, and to immediately protect the soil that you're going to be planting the trees on, you want to cover that soil with organic matter that is crucial. You want to do mulch or a living cover crop to help establish those trees. And you can even see in the picture the white things are tree tubes for whatever was planted in this big system. And yeah, I like the patterning of this because food forests can get very, like the design of them can get very complex very fast when you don't have lines or places to plant things. It's almost, oh my God, where do I plant this thing? But here you have, you know where to plant. You plant the trees right on the berms, and you can dance and get very creative within that parameter where you can plant so densely on these swales, and so it's basically a linear food forest. So that picture earlier of all the different size trees all fitting together, that's what you do in a linear way on the swales. And that's a particular area of interest for me, is figuring out what are the best combinations of plants to plant together. What is the understory berry bush that goes well with an apple tree? And what cover crop works well with those two? There's just so much to learn and experiment with about how to optimize and how to manage these systems. And here's a closer picture of that, of the trees planted on the swale. And this shows black locust trees, which are a nitrogen fixing support species. And we plant a lot of these at contour lines. It's one of the main support species we plant alongside all of the fruit and nut trees that we give the farmers. And we suggest interplanting them between all of the fruit trees because the nitrogen, the fertilizer that is produced by the microbes on the roots of these plants, is released when the tree is pruned. And so if you plant a black locust next to an apple tree and you prune the black locust, its roots will die and release that free nature's fertilizer to the fruit tree. And so you will not need to buy industrial fertilizer. You're using this billion-year-old ingenuity of nature to supply the fertility to your fruit trees, which often are very highly demanding trees. And yeah, that's why we recommend planting a lot, planting in between every fruit tree, and getting those root interactions. And also, it supplies timber and fodder, black locust, a very multi-use tree. Just a little plant highlight there. And yeah, so you can see here that the soil is very kind of barren and it's compacted clay soil, but yet the trees are doing very well because it is a swale and it's infiltrating the water. So that speaks to even in poor soil, water is often the limiting factor for growth. So it nails home if you get the water situation down, you can have good growth on your trees. And this is an example of it. These black locusts are doing very well, even in poor soil, which they do well in poor soil, and they're getting enough water. And the farm that I took this picture at spoke to that. He was saying, yeah, during a drought, the other trees that weren't planted on the swale, they were looking yellow. They were not doing as good as the ones planted on the swale. So yeah, it conserves water and soil simultaneously. So yeah, swales are pretty powerful intervention to use. And not every site needs them. It's a thing within permaculture to over swale the landscape or just think that, oh, swales are permaculture. But they are very powerful interventions to use. It's a tool in the toolbox for sure to keep in mind. And to wrap up, thought I would crystallize what permaculture is to me and to the world a little bit, and how it's inspired me, how it's kept me going on the journey, why I stayed in it and continued to deepen my relationship with it, is that I think it's just this radical affirmation that humans belong on this earth and are part of the web of life. And a lot of things you hear and a lot of behaviors that humans have towards the earth can say otherwise. And it's caused me a lot of sadness to think of all the damage we're doing and what our ecological niche is in on the earth. And permaculture really just affirms that we have a place on this planet, we deserve a place on this planet, we can provide all of the food, fuel, and fiber that we need to have an abundant life while regenerating the earth. There's no compromises needed for that. Yeah, it's a hopeful message that we can not be the most destructive species on this earth, but that we can be the most beneficial species. And we can see what's happening in the world today that we need to become the keystone species and be compassionate stewards of the planet. And we can't. And yeah, it's a powerful tool to regenerate some of the most degraded land on Earth. Using permaculture principles, one of Bill Mollison's students and co-teachers, Jeff Lawton, started this demonstration site in the Jordanian desert called the Green in the Desert Project, where starting from nothing, bare, compacted soil in the desert, using permaculture principles, shaping the land, using species that worked well. Slowly, year after year, he built up abundance to now have a 3/4 acre food producing oasis in the Jordanian desert. And it's a famous learning center where people come to learn permaculture and where he brings it to the world and really demonstrates the power. And this is where I did my PDC and really saw the power of it, that if it works in the most degraded soils on earth, it works anywhere. And that was driven home when I was there. And just this picture is beautiful, I think. Just seeing the oasis in the middle of the desert and affirming that we can have that beneficial impact on the world. And to end, Bill Mollison has a good quote when I think he was asked in an interview, what is permaculture? And he said, creating a nice place to live. And really resonate with that and like that as a little ending cherry on top. So that is all I have for the intro, and happy to chat more, talk about questions or comments, and
Wow, awesome job. I love that last line, creating a happy place, essentially. Nice, nice. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, David. That was great.
So we have a couple of questions here. One that came up for me, you talked a lot about contour lines. For somebody that doesn't know what that is, can you explain it a little bit? Give me the high school version of it, not a big old long one.
yeah. So a contour line is on a map, a contour line is the line that is level. And so it's the line that is level on the slope of a landscape, essentially. And
Same
so
when you say level, you mean same elevation.
yes, same elevation. And so that means since water always reaches a level, if you dig a narrow trench on a contour line, that will essentially be a very narrow pond where water will pool. And so that's what that picture was of all those brown lines in the landscape. Those are trenches dug on contour lines. So when water fills, it doesn't rush to either direction, it just sits and has
Hmm.
time to infiltrate.
And what we generally do is make on contour ditches, which we call swales. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, and the swales are the ditches, but there's many different ways to plant on contour. Contour Lines, the nonprofit, does work in Guatemala where they don't dig, they just plant on contour. And that still
Ah,
helps with water infiltration. If you just have a line of trees in that shape, in on contour, that will help with infiltration. No digging necessary.
go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, it reminds me of if you have a little vegetable garden and you're on a slope and you run your pathways down that slope, all that water's just rushing down those pathways. But if you run it like contour, like we're talking about against the slope, then that's a passive way to harvest some water for your little vegetable garden.
Yeah.
Nice. Leslie says that picture you had, the swales were pretty deep. Is that typical?
Yeah. They can range in depth. There's different reasons you would do a shallower swale versus a deeper swale, but the formula that particular nonprofit Contour Lines has landed on is doing pretty deep ones, around 2 or 3 feet actually, and that is to get to the subsoil and basically scrape off the layer of topsoil, put it down on the mound, and then dig subsoil and put it on the top of the mound. So if you dig deep enough, you have sterile subsoil on top, which you sterile subsoil meaning there's no seeds that are going to sprout. And so
Ah,
that just
yes.
makes management a lot easier. Because if you dig just a foot down and put topsoil on the berm and plant trees into it, you're going to have every seed that was in the ground sprout up and
Mm.
compete with the tree. So that's
Right?
why there's benefits of going a little deeper there.
Just on
Nice.
a note, we just had a disaster resiliency summit, and we were talking to folks from Helene or from Asheville who experienced Helene, and somebody there, Olivia Ramos, worked with contour lines, and she was saying the same thing. She was like, "Man,
Yeah.
when we dug those swales, we thought this is ridiculously deep." But then they
Mm.
experienced crazy amounts of rainfall within whatever it was, a week or something, and the swales performed perfectly. They had one minor
Mm.
blowout, and believe me, it's not a blowout. It's just like a couple little movement piles of soil, but
Mm.
totally worked perfectly. Proof's in the pudding. And I was wondering too why they were so deep but that makes total sense. It also would help massively with compaction because your compaction levels aren't going to go much below a foot, I wouldn't think. So that helps to open up that sort of like envelope of accepting the water and infiltrating it.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah, to speak more on the Helene water retention, one of the farmers had very deep swales, 2.5 feet deep, and Helene hit, and they all filled to the brim. And he calculated just the many thousands of gallons of water that he was able to infiltrate that would have just run into the river.
Yep.
And yeah, really speaks to on the large scale how the infiltration really adds up and can just that's the disaster resilience is
Yep.
it keeps your land good in that once in 100 year flood that's going to come in 10 years because climate change.
And if a watershed does that, then it keeps the town and the roads safe, which is so critical. So if we can ever get it to that level, that's where it'll be, I think, most effective.
Nice, nice. Okay, I have one question for you. We've been talking about a permaculture design course. A permaculture design course is a 72-hour, generally, a 72-hour deep dive into, I like to call it an introduction to permaculture. When I did my permaculture design course in 1991, I swear I had a sore forehead from smacking myself saying, "Oh my gosh, there's something I can call the way that I think." So for me, my permaculture design course was an affirmation of my circular thinking that I was 30 years old at the time, and I designed a decade earlier, I designed what we would now call a regenerative farm. And that was my takeaway. So why should somebody take a permaculture design course, David?
If they have an inkling that it is something that they resonate with, do it. So simple as that. You don't, it doesn't need to be a clear reason. But if you are wanting to have a new lens to see the world in with, and you're interested in regenerative agriculture and producing food in a way that benefits the planet. And yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Awesome. Anything else, Jesse?
I would add to that's a great question, and it's a thought-provoking one. I would add, no matter where you're at on Earth, permaculture works. So I'm in Michigan, it works great here, but there's different techniques in the dry lands or in an island or in an
Yep.
alpine region. So if, like David was saying, mentioning about Jeff Lawton's sort of quote, which really struck me when he said it, I don't know, 10 years ago at the start of the greening desert, humans can be as profound of a positive impact on planet Earth as we have been a profound negative impact. That's, oh my gosh, wow, yeah, okay. Then that kind of boils down to the individual where it's like, what's my little piece? Maybe I'm not going to redesign a desert, but like wherever you live, and you don't even have to produce food, but you could produce something that is ecologically beneficial to Earth so that you're leaving your little part of the world better than the way you found it. And so to me, the PDC is like the necessary guidebook, manual, and knowledge to then do that effectively. So you're not burning yourself out, that you're in alignment with your own family's goals and needs and all that, but you're also benefiting the Earth.
Nice.
Yeah, and the it's talked about a lot in the rural context and farm design, but people who live in suburbs and cities take a PDC, and that's how you make your city a better place to live. Even if you're not growing food and community gardens aren't your thing, rain gardens, pollinator gardens, and just endless ways to beautify the suburbs and cities. So
One of,
permaculture works in the heart of the city too.
yeah, one of the things that Brad Lancaster did down in Tucson is he figured out how to cut the curbs on the streets so that when the water ran by, he had a basin, a street side basin that would collect water. And then they planted natives in there. And that has re-treed their dozens of neighborhoods in Tucson. And he did that from his permaculture studies and learning that. I don't know why I needed to share that, but I needed to share that.
I love it. It's
Thank
a
you.
great
Thank you.
example.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, David. If you are interested in finding a permaculture design course, I am a huge proponent of taking a permaculture design course in your neighborhood, in your city, in your region, because a drylands permaculture design course like we do in Phoenix, Arizona, is specific to drylands.
Right.
Whereas the permaculture design course here in Asheville, North Carolina, is specific to a temperate rainforest. So what I suggest that people do is you put the name of the biggest city near you, like Seattle, permaculture design course, and see what comes up. I know that PINA is working on a list. Do we have that list yet, Jesse?
No, we don't have a map for that in terms of like where are all the latest PDCs. We do have a course events tab on our website that people can check out for that. But I agree with you, Greg. It's just as easy just to put in where you're from and nearest big city. There's also people will stumble upon online PDCs, permaculture design courses, which are great too. But I think all of us here might say take that and then also take one in your bioregion if you can a year or two later. And if I had to choose one over the other, I would say do it nested in your bioregion, because not only are you learning appropriate techniques for where you live, but you're also connecting to people that you might actually see regularly. An online course, you might never meet those people again. It's still beneficial and still can be fantastic.
That is the big reason I like to do them in person. There is a social piece of permaculture that happens when you're doing it in person that it can't be replaced. You don't get that online. Excellent. Bevan says, I really appreciate this presentation. Sparked quite a few ideas for my property. I also appreciate that you define permaculture as humans belong on the planet, as there are some loud voices right now that feel very differently. That is so true. And any final thoughts, David?
No, that's about it. Yeah. Appreciate being here today and sharing things in the chat and everything. Yeah.
Excellent. Jesse?
Nope, that's all for me. Thanks
All
everybody
right.
so much for being here. Thanks, David. Thanks, Greg. It was awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you all. We appreciate you. And check us next month. We have a husband and wife team that is doing our introduction to permaculture next month. Miranda says, I want to do permaculture with David. There you go.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
And we
Thank you.
will.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
And
everybody.
when we close this thing down, we're all going to go away. So thank you very much. Have a great day. Good job, everybody. Bye.
Bye.